When you are finding the inverse, here are your steps. Replace f of x with y, interchange x and y, solve for y, and then replace y with the symbol f inverse of x, which is your symbol for inverse. So for this first one, I ask you to find the inverse of this function. So step 1 is to replace f of x with y. Okay, that's step 1. Step 2 is to interchange x and y. So that means everywhere you see an x, write a y, and everywhere you see a y, write an x. Saying that one more time, everywhere you see a y, write an x, and everywhere you see an x, write a y. Step 3 is where the bulk of your work comes in. When you're solving this one, you want to get y by itself. So to get y by itself, you have to move the 7 and move the 2. To move the 7, I would subtract 7 from both sides. To move the 2, I would divide 2 by both sides. And y would equal x minus 7 over 2. At this point, I have y all by itself. So your last step, once you get the y all by itself, is you're going to replace y with f inverse of x. So your inverse for this function is x minus 7 all divided by 2. They get a little bit tougher. Okay, here's our next one. Step 1 is to replace f of x with y. Step 2 is to interchange x and y. Everywhere you see an x, write a y. Everywhere you see a y, write an x. Step 3 is to solve for y. So when we're solving for y here, we want to move the 1, move the 4, and then deal with the 3. So we're going to move the 1 first. We're going to divide by 4 second. And to finish it out, we're going to take we have to get rid of the 3. So the way that you get rid of an exponent is the inverse operation is to take the root of it. So to get rid of a 3 exponent, we would just take the cubed root. So I get the cubed root of x plus 1 over 4 equals y. Well, now y is by itself. So since y is by itself, that's going to be my answer, the cubed root of x plus 1 over 4. And that's going to equal f inverse of x. Okay, that should give us enough time to do one more of these. Okay, so for this one, I ask you to find the inverse of this function, and this one is much more complicated. So the first thing we'll do, just like we did the others, we're going to replace f of x with y. After that, we're going to interchange x and y. Everywhere you see an x, write a y, and everywhere you see a y, write an x. So this y becomes x. This x becomes y. This x becomes y, and that's how it looks. Now, here it gets a little more complicated. At this point, we're trying to solve for y, so that's going to be step 3. But solving for y is complicated here because we have a lot of y's and we have a fraction. So here's some little sub hints. The first thing I want to do is get rid of the fraction. The way that you get rid of the fraction, let me scoot that over a little, it's kind of in my way. The way that you get rid of the fraction is by multiplying by that denominator. So I'm going to multiply over here on the right by 2y plus 1, and if I multiply on the right, I have to also multiply on the left by 2y plus 1. A 2y plus 1 on the bottom and a 2y plus 1 on the top cancel out. So on this right side, that leaves me with 5y minus 3. Okay, so what I did here was I got rid of the denominator by multiplying through by that denominator, so on the right side it canceled out. On the left side it leaves me with parentheses. Well, that doesn't help me, so what I'm going to do on the left side is distribute. So that gives me 2xy plus x. Well, at least now I don't have a fraction anymore, so that's good news. So I got rid of the fraction. The next thing that you want to do is collect the y's on one side and let's say by themselves. Okay, so anything that doesn't have a y needs to move, and anything that does have a y needs to make sure it's together. So here's what I mean by that. This term right here has a y, so let's move it over here to the y side. You'll notice that this x term right here, it doesn't have a y, so let's put it over on the side that's not y. So when I move the blue 5y over, it becomes 2xy minus 5y. On this right side, I already have a negative 3, so I just brought it down, and when I move that green x over, it becomes negative. So now my y's are on one side all by themselves. The next thing that you want to do is factor out a y. Now, it may have something else in common too, but all I want you to do is factor out the y. So if I take a y out of this expression, it leaves me with 2x minus 5 left over. Now remember, my whole goal for this step was to get y by itself. So to get y by itself here, I can divide both sides by 2y minus 5. I'm sorry, that's an x. Divide both sides by 2x minus 5. So y would equal negative 3 minus x, 2x minus 5. That is your inverse.